The dinner had been set for 7 in the evening, and Naomi arrived at 6:50 with a bottle of wine she had spent 15 careful minutes selecting at the store on Peachtree Road. She had driven 40 minutes across Atlanta to get to the house in Buckhead. She had worn a forest green wrap dress that her best friend Tara had once told her made her look like she owned whatever room she walked into. She had brushed her natural curls out carefully and had put on small gold earrings, and the perfume she reserved for evenings she wanted to feel composed and ready. She had done all the small things right, as she always did, arrived early, dressed well, brought something thoughtful. That was the kind of woman she was. She had been that kind of woman every Sunday for 7 years without much acknowledgement from the family she was doing it for. Constance Pierce's house had never felt like a welcoming place, not from the first time Naomi had come to it as a guest, and not now. It was a wide, two-story colonial in a quiet part of Buckhead with cream walls and heavy curtains and a front lawn that stayed immaculate through every season, tended by a service that came twice a week. It was the kind of house that looked the way money looks when it is more concerned with appearances than comfort. Naomi had been coming to this house for 9 years, 2 while she and Trevor were dating and 7 since the marriage. She had never once felt at ease inside it. She had told herself it was her own discomfort, her own tendency to feel like an outsider in spaces that had not been built for her. She had told herself that many times about many things over the years. Constance was at the door before Naomi could knock. "You made it," she said. Her voice had the precise tone of a woman who had practiced being gracious so long that the practice had replaced the real thing entirely. "Good evening, Constance." Naomi handed over the wine. "You look well." Inside, the house smelled of roasted chicken and the furniture polish Constance used on everything. Trevor was in the sitting room near the fireplace with his brother Dennis and 2 cousins, Carl and his wife Diane, who came to these dinners occasionally and spent most of their time watching rather than contributing. When Trevor saw Naomi come in, he moved toward her, pressed a quick kiss to her cheek, and turned back without asking about her drive or her week. She set her bag on a chair near the door and stood for a moment, reading the room. Something was different tonight. She could not place it yet. The furniture was in its usual arrangement. The cousins were sitting where they always sat. Dennis was already drinking, which was not unusual. But there was something in the specific way Constance moved through the house, directed and precise, that told Naomi the evening had a purpose that had not been shared with her. The first hour passed without incident. The food was served at 7:30. Roasted chicken with a glaze Constance was proud of, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, corn bread that Dennis ate most of. The conversation moved between the family reunion being planned for late summer and a neighbor's legal trouble that Constance recounted in detail. Naomi ate and answered when asked, and said the things she had learned to say at these dinners over the years. She did not reach for more food than she needed. She did not take up more space than was given to her. She had spent years learning to be small in this house, and the learning had been so gradual she had barely noticed it happening. Then the plates were cleared. Constance went to the sideboard near the window, picked up a manila envelope, and set it on the table in the empty space between herself and Naomi. She sat back down. She folded her hands in front of her with the deliberate ease of a woman who had already decided how the next 20 minutes would go. "Naomi," she said, "there is something we need to discuss as a family." Naomi looked at the envelope. She did not reach for it. "Dennis has found himself in a difficult financial situation," Constance continued. Her voice stayed measured and careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this. "Creditors, a business arrangement that ended badly. The family has been looking at ways to address this, and we believe we have a workable solution." She tapped the envelope once with 2 fingers. "Inside are documents. They would transfer 30% of your business holdings to a Pierce family trust as collateral, temporarily. It would allow us to use those assets to restructure Dennis's obligations and protect him from further exposure." The cousins were looking at their plates. Dennis was looking at his wine. Trevor was looking at the tablecloth. Naomi kept her voice even and her hands in her lap. "Those are shares in a company I built," she said. 30%. It is not a full transfer, a temporary arrangement. My company was incorporated 12 years ago. I started it before Trevor and I were married with my own money under my own name. It is not a marital asset, and it has never been a Pierce family asset. "You are a Pierce," Constance said. "By marriage. The company was mine before the marriage, and it is mine now." The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives when everyone in it already knows what is about to happen, and no one wants to be the one who starts it. Dennis refilled his wine glass. Diane shifted in her chair and found something to look at near the window. Carl cut a small piece of the remaining corn bread and put it in his mouth and chewed slowly. Constance's expression did not change at the surface, but something behind her eyes shifted, a door closing somewhere in there. "I have been patient," she said. "I have welcomed you into this family. I have extended myself to you on many occasions and expected very little in return. I think that patience deserves some acknowledgement. I have never been ungrateful for your hospitality, Constance." "Then sign the papers." "I am not going to sign the papers." Constance looked at Trevor. It was the specific look of a woman calling in a debt she had been holding for years. The look said, "You told me you could handle this. Handle it." Trevor was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the tablecloth. Then he looked up at Naomi, and what she saw in his face was not the face of a husband who had found himself in an uncomfortable position. It was the face of a man who had agreed to something before she arrived, and was now simply waiting to see if she would cooperate or not. "I need you to do this," he said. "He's my brother, this is my family." "Dennis is not my creditor," Naomi said. "I did not make any agreements with his lenders. I have no legal or moral obligation to put my business on the line for a debt I had no part in creating." "It is not about obligation." Trevor's voice dropped lower. "It is about being part of something, about what you're willing to do for the people I love." "I have been willing to do quite a lot for the people you love for 7 years. This is different." "How is it different?" "Because this is my business. I built it. I funded it. I spent 12 years making it what it is. It belongs to me." Constance spoke again, and this time her voice had lost the practiced calm. It still did not rise, but it had an edge in it now that she no longer bothered to hide. "Trevor tells me you have always put your business above this family, above him, above everything that should matter." Naomi looked at her husband. He was looking at the table again. She waited. He did not correct his mother. He did not say that was not true. He did not say that the dinner had gone too far, or that the documents were inappropriate, or that a man who loved his wife did not sit at a table while his mother called her selfish. He sat there and let the silence work for his mother and waited for Naomi to either fold or cause a scene, because those were the only two options he had left room for. "Trevor," Naomi said. He looked up. "Do you want me to sign these documents?" 3 seconds, long ones. Then he said, "I want you to think about what this family means. I want you to choose. My family or your business, your independence, your dignity, whatever you want to call it." He said the word dignity, the way a person might say a word from a language they had no interest in learning, uncertain of the pronunciation and mildly contemptuous of the concept. "Choose," he said again. Naomi looked at the envelope on the table. She looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the 12 years before this dinner. She thought about the first client meeting she had taken alone, the first contract she had won, the 2 years she had worked from her kitchen table because she could not yet afford an office. She thought about the women she had hired and the projects she had delivered, and the things she had built with her own mind and hands and long hours. She thought about Trevor watching all of it and saying nothing much. Then she pushed her chair back from the table. She stood up. She picked up her handbag from the floor by her chair. She looked around the table once at each of them, at the cousins who would not meet her eyes, at Dennis and his wine, at Constance who was watching her with the calm certainty of a woman who expected to win, at Trevor who had his jaw set and his eyes fixed just past her shoulder. "I already have," she said. She walked out of the dining room, through the front hallway, out the front door into the Atlanta night. She got into her car and sat in the dark for 40 seconds without starting the engine. She did not cry. She breathed. She thought about what she knew and what she did not yet know. Then she started the engine and drove home. She did not know, on that drive, what she was about to find out. She did not know about the accounts, or the transfers, or the name Brianna Walsh, or any of the things that would come to her in a lawyer's office 5 days from now. She only knew what she had seen at that table: a man who had let his mother call her names without a word in response, and a family that had gathered around a legal document like it was a dinner invitation. She had made her choice. Now she needed to make it count. The house felt wrong when she got home. Not because anything had changed. Trevor's jacket was on the hook by the door exactly where he always left it. His shoes were under the console table in the hall. His coffee mug from that morning was on the drying rack, rinsed and turned upside down the way he always left it, that small, particular habit that she had once found endearing. Everything was where it always was. The house was the same house it had been that morning, when she left for a site meeting and kissed him on the cheek, and said she would be at Constance's by 7. That was what made it feel wrong. All of it was the same, and she was not. She sat at the kitchen island in her forest green dress and did not move for a long time. She was not angry in the way that anger usually arrives, hot and fast. She was doing something more careful than anger. She was sitting very still and letting herself understand what had happened tonight without the kind of noise that comes from fighting the truth of a thing. Trevor had known what was in that envelope before she arrived. He had known his mother was going to set it on the table and present it as a family decision. He had gone to that house knowing exactly what the evening was for, and he had kissed her cheek when she walked in and said nothing. He had sat beside her through the food and the conversation and the careful build-up, and he had waited. He had chosen his side before she even sat down. She called Tara at 9:37. Tara Hobbs had been her friend since the beginning of their sophomore year at Spelman, when they had ended up in the same study group for an economics class, and had spent the first 2 hours arguing about the same point from different directions before realizing they were saying the same thing. They had shared an apartment for 2 years after that. They had been in each other's corner through graduate school, through career starts, through a broken engagement on Tara's end, and the early difficult years of Naomi's marriage. Tara had the quality of someone who did not offer comfort before she offered honesty, which was the more useful gift. Tara arrived at 10:15 in sweatpants and a burgundy zip-up, carrying a small bag from the corner store with 2 bottles of sparkling water and crackers. She came through the front door, set the bag on the counter and said, "Tell me." Naomi told her. All of it. The envelope, Constance's voice, the cousins who would not look up, Dennis and his wine glass, Trevor's face when he looked at her and said the word choose. She told it without editorializing, just the facts in the order they happened, the way she would give a project update to a client. Tara listened. She did not interrupt. She poured the sparkling water into glasses and pushed one across the counter and waited until Naomi finished. Then she asked, "How long have you been watching this coming?" Naomi picked up the water. "Longer than I've been saying." "Talk to me about that." It was the question that needed answering, and Naomi had known it needed answering since she was sitting in the car in Constance's driveway deciding whether to cry or drive home. She thought back through the years of the marriage, not to find evidence of every wrong thing but to be honest about the shape of it, which was something she had been avoiding. The early years had been good, genuinely. Trevor had made her laugh. He had been interested in her work in a way that felt real, or at least felt real at the time. He had shown up for things that mattered to her, attended openings and presentations, stayed up late reading contracts she needed a second opinion on. There had been a year, maybe two, where the marriage had felt like the kind of thing she had hoped for. Then something had shifted, not in one moment. In the way things shift when a person stops investing and starts spending from whatever is already there. She had noticed it in small ways and told herself it was the normal settling of a long relationship. She had told herself she was being too demanding, too analytical, too focused on what was wrong rather than what was right. She had been telling herself those things, she realized now, for about 4 years. The money, she said to Tara. I noticed things with the money. How long ago? About 2 years. She set her glass down. The first time I went to make a transfer for a contractor and the joint account was short by about 4,000. I asked Trevor. He said he had covered a car repair he hadn't mentioned and forgotten to tell me. It made sense. I let it go. And then, 6 months later, 8,000 gone. He said he'd covered some of Dennis's rent because Dennis was behind and he didn't want to worry me. I wasn't happy, but I accepted it. Dennis is always behind on something. I thought it was a one-time thing. Tara was looking at her with the expression of someone who could already see where this was going. After that I stopped checking as carefully, Naomi said. I have my own accounts, my business accounts, my salary from the firm. The joint account was for household expenses and I kept enough in it to cover those. I didn't look closely at the details for a long time. She stopped. I made myself not look, she said. Tara did not say anything. I know what that is, Naomi said. I know exactly what it is. I was protecting the marriage, or I was protecting the idea of it. I was choosing not to know something because knowing it would mean having to do something about it. Most people do that, Tara said, at some point. The problem is I'm good with numbers. I'm a business owner. I look at financial records every week. I notice things and I chose to let his explanations be enough. She shook her head once. That's on me. You trusted your husband, Tara said. That's not something to be ashamed of. There's also a business operations account, Naomi said. Trevor is a signatory on it, has been for 4 years. I added him when we were refinancing a credit arrangement for the firm's second service line. I needed a cosigner on some documentation, and it was faster to add him than to set up a separate arrangement. I never removed him. Tara set her glass down carefully. What is his access level? Full transfer authority up to 50,000, without a secondary signature. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. You need a lawyer, Tara said, not unkindly. I know, I've been thinking it since the drive home. Do you have someone in mind? Patrick Ockhaffer. His name came up 2 years ago when I had a commercial lease dispute that didn't end up going to litigation, and a client of mine, Renee, used him last year for a business separation. She said he was careful and very thorough. Call first thing in the morning. I will. They stayed up until past midnight, not always talking, sometimes just sitting in the kitchen with the overhead lights on, and the city moving outside and the sparkling water going flat in their glasses. At one point Tara asked if Naomi was scared, and Naomi thought about it for a genuine moment. I'm clear, she said. That's different from scared. I don't know everything yet, so I don't know the full size of what I'm afraid of, but I'm clear about what I need to do next. After Tara left, Naomi went upstairs to the bedroom and stood in the doorway for a moment. Trevor's side of the bed was undisturbed. His book was on the nightstand. His phone charger was plugged in. She looked at it all for about 10 seconds, then picked up a pillow and her reading glasses and went to the guest room and lay down with the light on. She did not sleep right away. She ran through numbers in her head. She thought about the joint account and the operations account and the years of small signals she had chosen not to follow. She thought about the dinner table and the manila envelope and the way Constance had set it down as if the outcome had already been decided. She thought about 12 years of building something. She thought about what could have been taken from it without her noticing. She made a list in her mind of everything she needed to find out. By the time she fell asleep, the list was complete. Patrick Ockhaffer's office occupied a corner of the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue downtown. It was a clean and ordered space with a view of the skyline that Naomi would have appreciated more if she had been there for any other reason. She was not interested in the view. She was interested in the man across the desk. She had called his office at 8:15 that morning. His assistant said the earliest available appointment was in 2 days. Naomi said she needed something sooner and used the tone she used in business negotiations when she was not asking a question but delivering information about how things were going to go. She had an appointment at 11. Patrick Ockhaffer was a tall man with a closely trimmed beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had the particular manner of someone who had sat across from people in serious situations many times and had learned to stay very still and listen very carefully before saying anything. He shook her hand with a firm, brief grip, offered coffee, which she declined, and sat down. "Tell me what brings you in," he said. She told him. She was organized and direct. She explained the marriage, the business structure, the dinner, the documents Constance had produced, and Trevor's ultimatum. She explained the joint account irregularities she had noticed over the past 2 years and the explanations Trevor had offered each time. She explained the operations account and the signatory access she had granted him 4 years ago and never revoked. Patrick listened through all of it without interrupting. He wrote occasional notes on his yellow legal pad in a small, precise hand. When she finished, he asked about the timeline of the marriage, the date her business was incorporated, the specific language on the signatory documents from the credit arrangement. Then he asked to see everything. "Account statements from the joint account for the past 3 years," he said. "The operations account history for the same period, any shared credit cards, tax returns for the last 3 years, documentation of your business ownership, the original incorporation papers, any amendments, any operating agreements." "I can get all of that today." "Good, one more thing." He set his pen down. "Before we talk about how to proceed, I want to be direct with you about something. What you've described from that dinner, specifically the prepared documents and the coordinated pressure in a private setting, goes beyond a difficult family moment. Someone arranged that. Someone prepared those documents and scheduled that conversation and made sure you would be the only one at that table who did not know what was coming." Naomi looked at him. She had thought the same thing driving home and had not let herself say it. "Yes," she said. "I want to understand the full financial picture before we do anything else. The signatory access to your business account is the part that concerns me most right now. Not because I'm assuming the worst, but because I want to know what we're looking at." She left his office at noon and spent the afternoon gathering records. She pulled everything: the joint account statements going back 3 years, the operations account history, the business incorporation papers she kept in a fire safe in her home office, her tax returns, every shared financial document she could put her hands on. She made copies and brought them to Patrick's office by 4 that afternoon. Patrick reviewed the first few pages of the operations account history while she sat across from him and did not speak. After about 5 minutes, he put the pages down. "I'm going to bring in a forensic accountant," he said. "Her name is Alois Braxton. She works with my office regularly on cases involving financial disputes. She is very thorough and very good." "How long will it take?" "Give her 4 to 5 days." He slid a copy of his engagement agreement across the desk, and she signed it without hesitation. Then he walked her through 2 things she needed to do and 1 thing she needed to not do. The things to do: change the secondary authorization threshold on the business operations account to 0, requiring her signature on all transfers. using the procedural provision in the account agreement that allowed her to modify authorization levels without removing a signatory. This was legal and clean, and would not trigger anything visible on Trevor's end. The second thing, make a copy of every financial record in her home office and store them somewhere Trevor could not access. The thing not to do, nothing that looked like she was preparing for a legal fight. No closing accounts, no moving money, no removing Trevor from anything in a way that could be seen. "We want a clear picture of the current state of things," Patrick said. "We don't want anything that could be characterized as hiding assets or acting in bad faith." Naomi said she understood and meant it. She drove from Patrick's office to her firm on West Peachtree and worked until 7. She reviewed project timelines, approved 2 contractor invoices, and answered emails. Her senior designer Yvette knocked on her office door at 5:30 and asked, in the careful way Yvette did everything, if everything was all right. "Yes," Naomi said, "thank you for asking." Yvette nodded and went back to her desk without pushing further. That was one of the things Naomi valued most about her. She was perceptive enough to notice and professional enough not to pry. Naomi drove home that evening with a kind of focused calm that she recognized from the early years of building the firm, when problems were large and resources were small, and the only thing that got her through was doing the next thing on the list and not looking at the whole mountain at once. The next thing on the list was waiting 4 to 5 days. She could do that. The report from Alois arrived on a Thursday, 6 days after Patrick had first requested it. Patrick called Naomi that morning at 8 and asked her to come in at 2 that afternoon. He said to set aside at least 2 hours. His voice was calm in the way it had been calm in their first meeting, which she had come to understand meant he was preparing her for something. She wore a burgundy blazer and dark slacks. She drove downtown, parked, and rode the elevator up to his office with her hands still, and her mind already moving through possible shapes of what she was about to hear. Alois Braxton was already in the office when she arrived, a compact woman in her 50s with close-cropped hair and the steady manner of someone who had spent years looking at financial records without letting them surprise her. She had a laptop open on the low conference table and a stack of printed pages in a labeled folder. Patrick gestured for them all to sit around the conference table rather than at his desk, which meant this was a working review, not a formal presentation. "I want to walk you through this in sections," Patrick said. He set the summary report in front of her. "Take your time." The report was 34 pages. The summary table on the first page showed the total. $340,000. Alois started at the beginning. The first irregular transfer had occurred 25 months ago. $3,200 moved from the joint household account to a bank account that did not appear anywhere in Naomi's financial records. An account held solely in the name of Trevor Pierce at a bank where Naomi held no accounts. The transfer was labeled home repair. Alois had verified. There had been no home repair transaction during that period for any amount matching the transfer. Over the following 24 months, there had been 41 more transfers. They came from 2 sources, the joint account and the business operations account. The amounts ranged from $2,000 to $19,000. The labels varied: vendor payment, equipment expense, consulting fee, materials purchase. Alois had cross-referenced each label against the firm's actual vendor relationships, contractor records, and purchase history. None of the labels matched any real transaction. The total removed from the business operations account, $162,000. The total removed from the joint household account, $93,000. Then Alois moved to the second section. Within Trevor's hidden account, there had been outgoing transfers. 2 of them went to an account held in the name of Dennis Pierce, $40,000 and $45,000, sent 8 months apart. The timing matched 2 periods when Dennis had been in publicized difficulty with creditors, both of which Naomi remembered because Trevor had mentioned Dennis's trouble at the time, and she had listened sympathetically. Then Alois turned to the third section. There was a set of 54 payments over 18 months. They went to 3 payees. 2 were untraceable cash withdrawals from ATMs in the Midtown and Buckhead areas. 1 was a recurring payment, sent 12 times, to a residential address in Midtown Atlanta. The apartment was registered to Brianna Walsh. Patrick did not say anything. He let her read that page twice. Naomi looked at the name. She read it once, then again, then a third time, the way you read something when the letters are clear but the meaning takes a moment to fully arrive. Brianna Walsh. Patrick said after a moment. Alois cross-referenced the name. Brianna Walsh is employed at the same company Trevor works for. She appears in his professional directory. She has been listed there for 3 years. Naomi set the page down. She had not gone into this expecting an affair. She had gone in expecting financial misconduct, because the dinner and the access and the pattern of missing money had pointed clearly in that direction. But this, the rent payments, 12 months of them, the consistent, methodical sending of money from an account funded with money taken from her firm to an apartment in Midtown where a woman who worked in her husband's office lived. She sat with it. She did not feel what she might have expected to feel. There was no desperate grief, no collapse. What she felt was something quieter and more complete, like a last piece of information settling into a picture she had been assembling without knowing it. The picture was ugly, but it was finally the whole picture. "How do you want to proceed?" she said. Patrick said, "You have grounds for divorce on multiple counts, including the documented financial misconduct. The fraud case on the business account transfers is very strong because those funds were never marital assets. They came from business revenue and were transferred without authorization. The joint account dissipation is recoverable within the divorce settlement as marital fund misappropriation. And the transfers to Dennis can be pursued as part of a civil fraud claim, since he received funds he should have known were improperly diverted. Can you prove Dennis knew?" "We have text messages between Trevor and Dennis. They were captured in a separate legal matter Dennis was involved in 8 months ago, a small claims dispute, and they were preserved as part of that record. In those messages, Dennis asked Trevor directly where the money was coming from. Trevor told him it was from an account he had access to through his wife's firm." Patrick paused. Dennis asked no further questions and accepted the next transfer 6 days later. Naomi breathed in slowly. "I want to file for divorce," she said, "and I want to file the fraud claim at the same time. I recommend that approach as well. One more thing." She folded her hands on the table. "Brianna Walsh. I have no interest in pursuing anything against her. I'm not going to contact her, involve her, or ask anyone else to. She is not relevant to what I am trying to recover." "She doesn't need to be part of the case at all," Patrick said. "The financial records speak for themselves." "Good." She stood, buttoned her blazer, and picked up her bag. She looked at the summary table one more time. $340,000. The number sat there, precise and patient, like a statement of fact that had been waiting to be read. She thought about 12 years, all the long days, all the careful decisions, all the work. Then she put the report in her bag, thanked Alois, and walked out. Trevor was served on a Tuesday morning. Patrick's process server went to Trevor's office building in Buckhead at 9:45. Trevor was in a glass-walled conference room at the time, visible from the lobby, sitting with 2 colleagues in front of a projector screen. The server asked for him by name at the front desk. The receptionist called back to the conference room. Trevor came out to the lobby and the server handed him the envelope, confirmed his full name, and left. Naomi knew the approximate timing because Patrick had told her the schedule. She was at her desk at the firm when Patrick's assistant sent a text at 10:17. Service confirmed. She set the phone face down on her desk and went back to reviewing drawings for a hotel renovation contract her firm had been working on for 6 weeks. She worked through lunch. At 3 in the afternoon, Yvette knocked on her office door and said Trevor was in the lobby. "Tell him I'm in a meeting," Naomi said without looking up. "He says he'll wait." "He can wait as long as he likes. I won't be available today." She paused. "Thank you, Yvette." She heard voices in the lobby a minute later, then the front door. She exhaled and went back to the drawings. When she got home at 6:30, Trevor's car was in the driveway. He was sitting on the front steps. He stood when he saw her come up the walk, and she could see the day written on him. His tie was loose and off-center. His jacket was folded over his arm. His face had the look of a man who had spent 8 hours in the particular panic of someone who knows they've been caught and has not yet decided what story to tell. Naomi stopped on the path about 12 feet from the steps. "We need to talk," he said. "Contact Patrick Acaffer's office. His information is on the paperwork." "Naomi, you can't do this without at least talking to me first." "I have been talking to you for 7 years, Trevor." "This is different. This is legal. This is formal." "Yes," she said, "it is. I have a right to explain." She looked at him. She thought about the report. She thought about Aloyse's careful, detailed pages. She thought about 42 transfers and a midtown apartment and a name. "There is nothing you could say to me right now that I want to hear," she said. "Go home. Call Patrick's office in the morning." "This is my home. The mortgage on this house has been paid from my accounts for the past 22 months while other money was going elsewhere," she said. Her voice was very calm. "We will discuss the house through the lawyers." Something crossed his face then. Not guilt exactly, though it was somewhere near guilt. It was the look of a man who had not expected her to know that particular number, 22 months, and who now understood that she knew considerably more than he had assumed. "How much do you know?" he said. She did not answer. She walked past him to the front door, put her key in, and went inside. She locked the door. She stood in the front hallway and listened. She heard him stand on the steps for another minute. Then she heard his car start and pull out of the driveway. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. While the water heated, she sat at the island and blocked 2 phone numbers without ceremony. Constance's first, then Trevor's. She set the phone down and watched the kettle. Then she called Tara. Tara answered on the second ring. "He came to the office and then to the house," Naomi said. "What happened?" "I told him to call Patrick. He left." "Good, a beat. You doing okay?" Naomi looked at the kitchen counter. The kettle, the mugs on the rack, the house that was hers. "I'm doing," she said. "That's enough for today." She made her tea, sat at the kitchen table, and ate a bowl of soup she heated from a container in the refrigerator. The house was quiet in a way it had not been quiet before this week. Not the quiet of 2 people in separate rooms, but the quiet of a space that was entirely, simply hers. She found, to her own slight surprise, that it was not an uncomfortable quiet. She finished eating, washed her bowl, and went to her home office. She spent 2 hours reviewing project files. She sent 2 emails to clients. She updated a timeline document for Yvette. Then she went to bed in the guest room, which she had started to think of simply as her room, and slept without difficulty. It started 5 days after the filing and ran for 2 weeks. Constance contacted Naomi's neighbor Paulette first. Paulette was a kind woman in her mid-60s who had lived next door for 11 years and baked sweet potato bread for the block every Thanksgiving. She came to Naomi's door on a Saturday morning looking uncomfortable and said she had heard from Constance that there was some kind of misunderstanding, and she hoped things could get worked out. Naomi thanked Paulette with genuine warmth and told her gently that this was a legal matter and that it was already in the right hands, and that Paulette did not need to carry any of it. Paulette seemed quietly relieved and went back to her garden. 3 days later, a client called. Mrs. Hargrove had been using the firm for residential projects for 4 years and had referred 3 other clients. She was a straightforward woman who came directly to the point. which was why Naomi had always liked working with her. She said she had received a call from a woman who identified herself as a member of the Pierce family, asking whether the firm was stable and whether Naomi's personal situation was affecting her work. Mrs. Hargrove said she had told the woman nothing and ended the call quickly, and she wanted Naomi to know. "Thank you," Naomi said. "I'm sorry you were put in that position." "Don't apologize," Mrs. Hargrove said. "I just want you to know I called because I'm a client and a professional, not because I'm interested in rumors." Naomi wrote both incidents in a document and forwarded it to Patrick. Then Trevor came to the office. It was a Wednesday, mid-afternoon. He did not come inside. He stood on the sidewalk in front of the building on West Peachtree and stayed there for 35 minutes. Her staff could see him through the large front windows. Yvette came to Naomi's office and said quietly that Trevor had been outside for a while. "I'm aware," Naomi said. "Let me know if he tries to enter. Otherwise, the day continues as normal." He left at 4:15 without coming in. He came back the following Monday, 30 minutes on the same stretch of sidewalk. Yvette documented both appearances with time-stamped photographs from the interior and sent them to Naomi by email. Naomi forwarded them to Patrick. The staff held together. This was Yvette's doing more than anything else. She had the quality of someone who could hold a room steady by simply being steady herself, and the rest of the team followed her lead. There was no gossip, no dropped work, no disruption. Projects continued on schedule. The clients who came in for presentations got the same quality of service they had always received. Naomi was grateful for this in a way that went beyond professional gratitude. On a Thursday afternoon in the middle of the second week, Gloria Vance walked in. Naomi had not called her. She had not told her what was happening. She heard Yvette's voice in the lobby and then Gloria's voice, and then Yvette knocked on her door and said Gloria was here and asking to see her. "Send her in," Naomi said. Gloria came in and sat down without ceremony. She was wearing a navy blazer and her silver locks were pinned back. She looked at Naomi the way she always looked at people, directly, without performance. "I heard some things," she said. "I wanted to see you in person." "What did you hear?" "Divorce filing, lawyers, Trevor's family making calls to people they shouldn't be calling." She tilted her head slightly. "That about right?" "Close enough." "How's the firm?" Naomi considered the honest answer. "We lost a bid 2 weeks ago that I believe we would have won otherwise. The client went with someone else without explanation. I can't prove it was related to any of this." Gloria nodded, as if she had expected something like that. She reached into her bag and placed a business card on the desk. "There's a developer I've been advising. Commercial mixed-use project downtown, large scale in the planning stages. They're about 4 months out from releasing a design RFP. I mentioned your firm to them 2 weeks ago before any of this started and they were interested." She tapped the card. "If you want an introduction, I'll make it." Naomi picked up the card. Something in her chest, which had been held tight for 2 weeks, released slightly. "Thank you," she said. "Win the bid," Gloria said. "That's how you thank me." She stayed for another 30 minutes and they talked about the project, the scope, and the timeline and the developer's priorities. And Gloria stayed entirely within the world of the work and did not ask about Trevor or Constance or the legal proceedings. She held the conversation in the space where Naomi was most capable and most herself, and Naomi recognized this as a form of care that did not require anyone to be fragile. After Gloria left, Naomi sat for a while in her office with the city outside the window and the building humming quietly around her. Yvette and the team were at their desks. The phones were ringing with the normal business of a running firm. The pressure from outside had not moved anything. It had not moved her. It had not moved her staff or her clients or the work. She was still here. The firm was still here. She picked up her pen and got back to it. Patrick called her in at the end of the 3rd week. When she arrived, Alois was already there with her laptop and her labeled folders, and the three of them sat around the low conference table in the triangle arrangement Naomi had come to associate with the working sessions where the real information came out. Patrick had coffee. Naomi declined. Alois had a glass of water. "We have the complete picture," Patrick said. He set the final report in front of her. 38 pages. He had added a section since the initial review. The Dennis investigation had expanded since the first presentation, and there were now additional documents from the separate civil matter that had captured Dennis and Trevor's text exchanges. They started at the beginning again and went through it in full. The business operations account transfers, $162,000 over 22 months. The labels on the transfers, none of them matched real vendor or contractor transactions. Alois had confirmed this by cross-referencing against invoices, vendor contracts, and the firm's purchasing records. The money had gone to Trevor's hidden account and from there had been dispersed. The joint account transfers, $93,000 over 25 months. The same pattern. Funds moved in amounts small enough to avoid scrutiny, labeled in ways that referenced plausible household expenses, going to the same hidden account. The wire transfers to Dennis, $85,000 total. 2 separate transfers 8 months apart, received and used to pay 2 separate creditor accounts in Dennis's name. The Brianna Walsh payments, remaining funds from the hidden account, dispersed over 18 months in the form of rent and cash. Then Patrick turned to the new section. The text messages between Trevor and Dennis had been extracted from the court file from Dennis's separate matter and were now part of Patrick's documentation. They were straightforward and damning. Dennis had asked in a message sent the week before the second wire transfer where the money was coming from. He used those exact words. Trevor's response: "An account I have access to through the firm. My wife won't notice, she doesn't check carefully." Dennis had replied with 2 words: "Understood, good." 6 days later, the transfer arrived. Naomi read the exchange twice. She read Trevor's words: "My wife won't notice, she doesn't check carefully." She thought about the careful not looking she had described to Tara 2 weeks ago. She thought about how right he had been for a while. She was checking carefully now. "Total ordered to be recovered," she said, looking at the summary table. $340,000, Alois said. "The business account theft is recoverable as civil fraud. The joint account transfers are recoverable as marital dissipation. The Dennis transfers are part of the fraud claim since he received funds he knew were improperly diverted." "What about the documents from the dinner?" Naomi said. "The ones Constance brought." Patrick had been working on that in the background. He had traced the document preparation to a notary and legal services office in Dunwoody that Dennis had used in the past for various transactions. Dennis had arranged the drafting. The documents had been prepared approximately 2 weeks before the dinner. "So Trevor and Constance and Dennis planned the dinner together," Naomi said. "The evidence suggests coordinated preparation. Yes. The intent appears to have been to secure your business assets as collateral before you had reason to investigate the accounts. A signature on those documents would have significantly complicated any subsequent legal claim." Naomi sat with that for a moment. She thought about Constance setting the envelope on the table with such practiced ease. She thought about how she had almost reached for it, purely out of the reflex she had spent years building. Accommodate. Consider, be reasonable. She had not reached for it. "File everything," she said. "The divorce and the fraud claim. I want them on record simultaneously." Patrick made a note. "One more thing," Alois said. "I'll be available to testify to the financial methodology and findings. The documentation chain is very clean. There are no gaps in the record." Naomi thanked her and meant it. She left the office and walked to her car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about all the things that had been done to her quietly over 2 years in the dark corners of accounts she had trusted. She let herself feel the full weight of it, the deliberateness of it, the patient calculation of it, the fact that someone had looked at what she had built and decided it was available to be taken. She felt the weight and she held it, and then she put it down. She started the car and drove to her office, where Yvette had a project update waiting and 2 clients were coming in at 4. She spent the rest of the day working, which was what she did best, and she did it very well. The first hearing was set for a Tuesday in October. Patrick had told her to dress professionally and simply, the way she would dress for a serious client presentation. She wore a deep blue dress with 3/4 sleeves and low closed-toe heels. She looked in the mirror before she left the house and thought about the 7 years in which she had chosen her clothes for other people's comfort and other people's approval, and thought about how she was choosing them now only for herself, and how that felt different in a way she could not fully explain but could clearly feel. She drove to the courthouse on Pryor Street and met Patrick in the lobby at 8:40. He reviewed the key points of the presentation with her in the waiting area while the building filled around them. He was calm and prepared, and his calm helped with hers. Trevor arrived at 8:55 with his attorney, a man named Calloway who had the ease of someone who specialized in making difficult situations look complicated enough to negotiate around. He was dressed expensively. He shook Patrick's hand in a brief, professional way, and they exchanged a few words that Naomi did not catch. Then Calloway looked at Naomi in the manner of someone assessing an opposing position, and she looked back at him without expression. She looked at Trevor once. He was in a dark suit with a pressed shirt, which meant someone had been taking care of him. He looked smaller to her than he had at the dinner table in Buckhead, not physically but in some other way that was harder to name. The way a person looks when they are standing in a room that does not belong to them and cannot be controlled. He looked at her for a second and then looked away. They entered the courtroom and took their places on opposite sides. Judge Hartwell entered at 9 and the room stood. She was a measured woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the manner of someone who had presided over a great many divorce proceedings and was not impressed by either bad behavior or well-dressed attorneys. She settled her glasses and reviewed the preliminary filings, and then looked at both parties in turn with the even gaze of someone who had decided she would form her own conclusions. Calloway moved first. He presented a settlement offer. The settlement would have Trevor acknowledge the divorce, agree to a payment of $60,000 as a joint account dissipation claim, retain equal share of all marital assets including the home, and in return, the fraud claim against the business account would be dropped entirely. Naomi felt Patrick shift beside her by a fraction. She had told him before they came in that she would not accept a settlement that cleared Trevor's record on the business account. The business account money was not a marital negotiation. It was something taken without authorization from a company that belonged entirely to her, and she needed the court to say that. Patrick declined the settlement. He said it concisely and then laid the case out. He started with the business operations account. The Alois report was entered into evidence. He walked through the transfers in a methodical sequence. Dates, amounts, labels, the verified fact that none of the labels matched real business transactions, the account they traveled to, and the fact that this account had never been treated as a joint or marital account in any tax filing, business registration, or financial document over its entire history. He showed 4 years of tax returns. Trevor had not listed any interest in, income from, or access to Naomi's business on any of them. He moved to the joint account dissipation. He showed the pattern of transfers across 25 months, the amounts, the hidden account, the clear and consistent direction of money moving out without any corresponding household expense. He showed the wire transfers to Dennis. Amounts, dates, receiving account, the text messages. He walked through the message exchange without comment, letting it say what it said. Calloway raised a procedural objection to the text messages. Judge Hartwell reviewed the basis, considered it briefly, and allowed the messages in as pattern evidence. Then Calloway presented Trevor's defense. He argued that signatory access to the business account was evidence of participation in the marital financial structure, and that transfers made by a party with legal authorization to make them could not be characterized as fraud in the context of a marriage. He argued that the joint account transfers were marital funds being used for family purposes, including support of a family member. He argued that, without explicit evidence of intent to deceive, the transfers represented financial decisions made within the scope of the marriage. He was smooth. He had clearly done this before, but his argument required the court to accept that Trevor had made 42 transfers over 2 years to a hidden account in his own name and never once mentioned any of them to his wife, as a form of legitimate marital financial management. Judge Hartwell asked Calloway one question: was the spouse informed of these transfers at the time they were made? Calloway said Trevor had generally managed certain aspects of their finances, and that detailed communication about every transaction was not the standard in most marriages. The judge made a note. She asked Trevor directly if he had discussed any of the 42 transfers with his wife before making them. He said they had general conversations about finances. She asked him to identify a specific conversation in which he had told his wife he was moving money to a separate account. He could not. Patrick, on cross, asked Trevor a single follow-up. Were any of the fund transfers to the secret account ever mentioned to your wife, verbally or in writing before, during, or after the transfer? Trevor said he did not recall specific conversations. Patrick sat down. Naomi sat through all of it in her deep blue dress with her hands in her lap. She listened to Trevor speak in the even way she had learned to listen to things in this process, looking for facts and finding a conspicuous absence of them. When Calloway looked at her during his arguments, she met his gaze without any particular expression. When Trevor spoke, she listened to his words without emotion and noted every point at which his version of events could not be made to match Aloysius' records. The first hearing adjourned at 4:15. Judge Hartwell set the ruling date for 3 weeks out and instructed both parties to submit any remaining documentation within 10 days. In the corridor outside, Patrick walked beside Naomi until they were well clear of Trevor and Calloway. "How are you holding up?" he said. "I'm fine," she said, and she meant it, not in the way people say it to signal they are not fine, but in the plain, direct sense. She was fine. She had sat in that room and heard every word and felt the ground beneath her stay solid throughout. "The ruling will go your way," Patrick said. "I know," she said. She drove home in the early evening traffic on I-75 and made dinner and ate at her kitchen table in the quiet that had become her quiet, the quiet she had made for herself. And after she ate, she sat for a long time with a cup of tea and looked at the kitchen she had chosen and the house she had kept and thought about how much closer she was to the end of this than the beginning. 3 weeks. She could do that. The day of the ruling was a Thursday in November. Atlanta was cold and bright, the kind of clear fall day the city produced a few times a year when the air came down from the north and everything looked sharper than usual. Naomi drove to the courthouse on Pryor Street and found a parking spot 2 blocks away and walked in the morning air with her coat buttoned and her folder under her arm. She wore a royal blue blazer over a cream blouse and dark trousers. She had bought the blazer 3 months ago and had not worn it yet. She had been waiting for the right morning. Patrick was in the lobby. He handed her a coffee she had not asked for but accepted. They stood together and did not talk much, which was comfortable by this point. They had been through enough sessions together that silence between them had become a working silence rather than an awkward one. Calloway arrived at 8:45, alone. Trevor came in shortly after and took a seat at the far end of the lobby. Naomi did not look at him. They were called into the courtroom at 9. Judge Hartwell entered and was seated. The room settled. She read from prepared notes without preamble. which was a sign that this ruling had been carefully considered and was not going to be modified by anything said in the room this morning. The divorce was granted, effective immediately upon filing of the final order. Regarding the joint account dissipation, the court found that $93,000 had been systematically removed from a jointly held marital account without the knowledge or consent of the non-transferring spouse. Trevor Pierce was ordered to restore this amount in full as part of the marital asset division. Regarding the business operations account, the court found that $162,000 had been transferred from an account funded by business revenue belonging solely to Naomi Pierce. The court found that this account had never been treated as a marital asset in any legal, financial, or tax document, and that the transfers were made without authorization. Trevor Pierce was ordered to repay this amount in full as part of the resolution of the fraud claim. Regarding the marital home, the home was to be sold, with the full proceeds going to Naomi Pierce. The court noted the documented record showing that Naomi Pierce had made all mortgage payments on the property for 22 months while marital funds were being diverted. Trevor Pierce held no claim to equity in the property. Regarding Naomi Pierce's business, Pierce Interior Design Group, the court confirmed full and exclusive ownership by Naomi Pierce. The business had been incorporated prior to the marriage, operated continuously under her sole ownership, and Trevor Pierce held no legal claim to any portion of it. Regarding Dennis Pierce, the court referred the matter of the two wire transfers to a civil proceeding, noting the documentary evidence establishing knowing receipt of improperly diverted funds. The civil case would be heard separately. Total ordered in Naomi's favor. The full $340,000 plus the home proceeds, minus standard court costs. Naomi sat very still through all of it. She received every line of the ruling with the same focused attention she brought to a contract review, hearing every word, noting every point, making sure the record matched what she knew. It matched. It matched exactly. 3 months of careful, documented, methodical work had produced a clear and complete record, and the court had read it and understood it and said what it said. When Judge Hartwell finished, the room began to move. Calloway leaned toward Trevor and spoke quietly. Trevor sat for a long moment with his head slightly down. Then he stood and buttoned his jacket and walked out without looking at Naomi. She did not watch him go. She turned to Patrick and said, "Thank you." He shook his head once. "You built the case, I just presented it." Outside the courthouse, she stood on the steps in the November air and looked at the street. The city was moving around her in the way cities move, entirely without reference to what had just happened inside the building behind her. She had expected to feel something larger, something with more weight and volume. Instead, she felt what she had felt since the night she walked out of Constance's dining room and drove home alone, solid, unshifting, like a woman standing on ground that belonged to her. She took out her phone and called Tara. Tara picked up on the second ring. "It's done," Naomi said. A beat of silence, then all of it. All of it. She heard Tara exhale, long and slow, the kind of exhale that carries everything that could not be said. "Go home," Tara said. "I'll bring food." Naomi looked at the Atlanta skyline above the courthouse buildings, clear and bright and very still. "I'll see you in an hour," she said. She walked to her car and drove home through the clear November morning, and for the first time in 3 months she let herself think about what came next. Not the legal next or the financial next. The personal next. The life she had been setting aside to get through this. The life she was about to start living again on her own terms and in her own space and with her own whole, uncompromised, undiminished self. She was ready for it. The second studio opened on the first Saturday of April. It was a converted space on Marietta Street, a building Pierce Interior Design Group had acquired and renovated over 3 months. And if you were paying attention to the way the renovation had been done, which most of the guests that afternoon were not because they were looking at the event itself, You could see the particular care of a firm that had designed the space for itself. The ceiling was high. The windows ran floor to ceiling on the east side. The lighting was clean and bright, and used the natural April morning to its advantage without calling attention to it. The walls held a rotating display of the firm's best project photography from the past 5 years, printed large and framed simply. Naomi had opened the building herself that morning at 6:30, before anyone else arrived, and had walked through it alone. She had walked from room to room in the quiet, before the catering arrived and before Yvette started setting up the display stands, and before Tara got there early to help with the chairs. She had walked through it in her deep forest green dress, the dress she had worn twice before, once to a client dinner and once to a project opening, and she had stood at the tall east windows and looked at Marietta Street in the early morning light and thought about nothing at all for a few minutes. Then she had thought about everything. She thought about the mixed-use commercial contract that Gloria had introduced her to in October, at the lowest point of the legal proceedings, when the pressure campaign was still running, and Trevor was appearing on the sidewalk, and Constance was calling mutual friends. She had won that contract in December, 3 weeks after the ruling. It was the largest single contract the firm had ever received. The fees from the first billing phase had funded the acquisition of this building. The acquisition of this building had been finalized, using the financial recovery the court had ordered. Money Trevor had taken, returned to her by a judge, turned into a building on Marietta Street. She thought about that for a while. Tara arrived at 9, carrying a bag of things she had said were essential and were probably entirely unnecessary, and hugged Naomi at the door in the way Tara hugged people, completely and without advance warning. "Look at this place," Tara said. "Thank you for helping last night," Naomi said. "I moved about 12 folding chairs." Tara looked around the main space. "I think you can manage without crediting me." Yvette arrived at 9:15 and immediately began checking the setup with the efficient thoroughness that Naomi had depended on for 8 years. Yvette was wearing a burgundy blazer and looked, as she always looked, like someone who had already thought of the problem you had just noticed and addressed it before you arrived. "We're in good shape," Yvette said, which from her was as close to jubilant as it got. The guests started arriving at 11. Clients, contractors, 2 journalists from a design publication that had been covering the firm's expansion, a developer who had spoken to them about a possible second commercial project, 3 women Naomi had gone to college with who had stayed in Atlanta and remained in her life in the varied, intermittent way that long friendships do, a photographer who was documenting the opening for the firm's press materials. Gloria arrived at noon. She came through the door and walked the space without pausing to greet anyone, moving through each room with her hands behind her back, looking at the walls, looking at the proportions, looking at the way the light came in. When she reached Naomi near the east windows, she said, "This is good work." "We have you to thank for the contract that made it possible," Naomi said. "I made an introduction," Gloria said. "You made everything else." She looked at the room, then back at Naomi. "Are you going to take on more staff for this space?" 2 new designers start in May. We're also looking at an associate position." Gloria nodded as if this was exactly the right answer. "Good." She stayed for 2 hours and spoke to several guests and ate something from the catering table, and at one point cornered Yvette in conversation about a material sourcing approach that Yvette appeared to find genuinely interesting, which made Naomi smile. At some point in the middle of the afternoon, in a quiet moment between conversations, Naomi found herself standing alone near the east windows with a glass of sparkling water in her hand. The room was full of people. The catering table was down to its last items. The photographer was taking final shots of the display wall. Yvette was talking to a contractor. Tara was laughing at something the developer had said. Naomi looked at the room. She thought about a Sunday night in Buckhead. She thought about driving 40 minutes to a house that had never felt like hers. She thought about a forest green dress she had worn because Tara said it made her look like she owned the world. She thought about a manila envelope set on a table, a family arranged in a half-circle around her, and a man she had been married to for 7 years who could not look at her when he said the words she was still thinking about. Choose. She had chosen. She had chosen to walk out of that house and drive home alone and sit at her kitchen island and call her best friend. She had chosen Patrick Ockefer and Alois Braxton and 38 pages of careful financial documentation. She had chosen to stand in a courtroom in a deep blue dress and not cry and not flinch and hear everything that had been done to her spoken aloud on the record. She had chosen to stay in the business she had built, to show up every morning and approve the drawings and answer the clients and stand in the hallway when Yvette said Trevor was on the sidewalk, and not be moved. She had chosen herself. Not in any dramatic or grand sense. In the daily, consistent, practical sense. The sense that meant waking up the morning after the divorce filing and going to work. The sense that meant calling Gloria back about the developer introduction and preparing a proper proposal and winning the contract on the quality of the work. The sense that meant buying this building and renovating it and opening it and standing in it on a Saturday morning in April in a deep green dress with the April light coming through the tall east windows. She had chosen her dignity, not as a concept, as a practice, as something she showed up for every day the way she showed up for the firm. She looked at the people in the room. Tara was catching her eye from across the space, smiling in the way she smiled when she was pleased and did not need to say so. Naomi smiled back. Yvette lifted a small glass in her direction without breaking her conversation. Gloria, at the catering table, gave her a single nod that contained, as Gloria's nods always did, more information than most people's speeches. Naomi raised her sparkling water slightly. She had given up a marriage and kept everything else. She had lost a man who had made his choice long before that Sunday dinner, and she had gained this. A room full of people who had shown up for her work and her honesty, and the particular kind of woman she had always been, before anyone had asked her to be smaller. It was enough, more than enough. It was the thing that had always been waiting for her on the other side of the choice. She took a sip of her sparkling water and turned back to the room and went to talk to her guests, and the afternoon moved forward the way good things move, lightly and with purpose, and without looking back.